Imamaral. They said I was the quiet one, the helper, the good daughter, the invisible sister. But what they really meant was easy to erase. Until I walked into my sister's house and saw her, kneeling on broken glass, sobbing, hands bleeding. That was the moment I realized they weren't in control anymore. The lies, the forged signatures, the years they rewrote me out of my own life, I remembered everything. Now the question is what happens when the one you tried to bury comes back, not just with memories, but with proof? It was one of those San Diego afternoons when the air feels heavy with salt and sunlight, the kind that makes every shadow sharp. I remember pulling into Callista's driveway with my heart drumming against my ribs, not from excitement, but from that strange unease you can't explain until it's too late. We hadn't spoken in weeks. That wasn't unusual. Silence was our family's favorite language. But something felt wrong. Her car was in the garage. The door to the house was cracked open, like someone had rushed in and never came back out. I knocked, once, twice, called her name, waited. No sound. I thought maybe she was sleeping, maybe sick. I pushed the door open. The smell of cleaning chemicals hit first, sharp, synthetic, like a hospital corridor. Then the sound came, a wet, trembling sob. My shoes crunched on something brittle. Glass. It took my eyes a second to adjust. Then I saw her. Callista was on her knees in the middle of the kitchen floor, surrounded by shards of a broken vase. Blood ran down her fingers, mixing with the cleaning water she kept wiping at as if she could erase the mess with her own hands. Her hair stuck to her face, and her shoulders trembled. "Callie?" My voice barely came out. She looked up, and for a moment, I thought she didn't recognize me. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked with salt and shame. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't pretend you care. You gave them all a reason to break me." I froze. My instinct was to reach for her, to press a towel into her hands, to call for help, but she flinched back as if my touch would burn her. I didn't know what she meant, not yet. But the venom in her voice cut through every word of concern I'd been rehearsing in my head on the drive there. "Callista, what happened?" "You happened," she said. "You and your perfect little conscience." Her words landed like stones. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but all I could do was stare at the blood running down her palms and the reflection of both of us in the puddle between us. I realized that whatever broke her wasn't just the glass, it was something older, heavier, years in the making. I stayed long enough to make sure she wasn't bleeding too badly. When she ordered me out of her house, I obeyed. Not because I was afraid, but because that's what we were taught to do, leave quietly when love turns into blame. That evening, I found myself driving without direction. The sun dipped low, casting a bruise-colored hue over the city. My phone buzzed, a reminder for the family meeting scheduled that night. The one I had forgotten about. Or maybe avoided. I arrived late to our mother's old house, the Crawford estate, the one everyone treated like a shrine since Dad passed. It looked the same, only emptier. Too clean. Too staged, like a photo meant to convince strangers we were still a family. Everyone was already seated around the long dining table when I walked in. Mother sat at the head, hands folded neatly in her lap, her gaze distant. Aunt Myra filled her glass with water even though it was already full. The rest of them, the cousins, uncles, the so-called partners of the family foundation, watched me enter as if I'd arrived at the wrong funeral. Callista was there too. Bandaged hands, hair brushed, face calm, not a trace of the woman from earlier. She didn't look at me. "We can begin," she said. Her voice carried authority, the same voice that used to command every family holiday. I took a seat near the end, where I always sat. Out of the way, easy to ignore. The discussion started about property, how to manage the estate, who would oversee the trust, how the foundation Dad built should continue. I kept quiet, taking notes, nodding when appropriate. Then Callista leaned forward. "I just want to make something clear," she said, her tone smooth as honey. "Emerald didn't build anything. She only kept herself busy while the rest of us worked." The room went still. I felt every gaze flick toward me, then away, like a reflex. My mother blinked slowly, confused. "Oh, sweetheart, that's not fair," she murmured weakly, but her words carried no weight. I wanted to speak, to remind them how I'd mortgaged my condo to keep this place from foreclosure when the market crashed. How I spent nights balancing their accounts while they attended fundraisers. But I didn't. Because in this family, proof never mattered more than performance. Callista smiled, satisfied with the silence that followed. No one defended me. Not Aunt Myra, who'd once called me the glue of this family. Not my mother, whose fading memory now offered her a convenient escape from confrontation. The humiliation sat in my throat like a stone. My pulse thudded in my ears. I caught Callista's smirk, small, cruel, triumphant. When the meeting ended, people stood, stretched, poured wine, and resumed small talk as if nothing had just happened. I walked out quietly, feeling the air in my chest thin until it hurt to breathe. I drove until I reached the ocean. The parking lot near La Jolla Shores was nearly empty. The sea stretched dark and infinite, its surface trembling with reflected moonlight. I rolled down the windows and let the salt air burn through the tightness in my lungs. The sound of the waves reminded me of all the nights I'd sat up sewing curtains for the old house, cooking dinners no one thanked me for, fixing leaks in the roof with my own hands. Things I did because I believed love was measured by how much you endured quietly. But tonight, silence didn't feel like strength. It felt like erasure. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app. My hands shook, not from anger this time, but from the sudden clarity that I was done pretending. I typed, "If you bleed in silence, they say you never got hurt." The glow from the screen reflected in my eyes like a small, defiant flame. For the first time in years, I decided to document everything. The comments. The looks. The small betrayals. If I couldn't change them, I would at least keep the truth somewhere safe. I sat there for what felt like hours, the tide rising and falling like a slow breath. I thought about Callista's blood on the kitchen tiles, about the way she said my name like it was poison. Maybe she wasn't the only one who'd been bleeding. Maybe I'd just learned to hide it better. When the night grew cold, I started the car, letting the headlights cut through the fog creeping over the beach. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked strange, tired, but sharper somehow. I wasn't sure what I was building yet, but I knew one thing: the next time they tried to bury me under their silence, I'd leave a record. That night, I opened a photo album, and something was missing. That night's silence lingered with me as I sank onto my sofa, the open photo album lying at my side. The images were supposed to anchor me, but as I flipped one page, then another, I realized they had betrayed me. A face I remembered had vanished. I sat in darkness, struck by a sharp chill. The old family album, Crawford Memories, 1992 to 2015, was supposed to hold proof of our shared past, to legitimize claims I once trusted. But now, it felt like an unfaithful mirror. I leaned closer, scanning page after page: home construction, holiday dinners, birthday cakes. There was Dad and Callista, Mom and the cousins. But me? I was fading. My reflection in earlier photos, where I had stood beside Dad, paintbrush in hand, a proud grin, had been replaced. In its place was Callista, alone, perhaps standing where I should have been. Panic rose in my throat. My heart hammered. I picked up another album, the Home and Heart collection, the one Dad had inscribed to me with his shaky scrawl, "To my daughter Emerald, who rebuilt this house with love." My fingers trembled as I turned the pages. Scene after scene, my presence receded. I gripped the edges of the pages, nails pressing into the glossy surface. How many versions of me had they erased? I shut the album with a snap that seemed too loud. I turned on the lights, unwilling to let shadows lie. In the living room, framed photos stood quietly: my high school graduation, my first teaching contract, two sisters side by side. I crossed the room and pulled them from the wall, searching for where I had begun to vanish. In that dwindling glow, the edges of those photos blurred. Morning came like an accusation. Sunlight slanted through blinds, painting stripes across my face. I forced myself out of bed, pulled on clothes, and prepared for the confrontation I'd needed but feared, with Mom. Her house smelled the same, a mix of worn carpet, lavender plug-in, and memories too heavy to keep hidden. I handed her one of the photos, me and Dad, waving paint rollers at the house. "Mom," I said, voice softer than I intended, "do you remember this day?" She folded her hands, gaze distant. The lines on her face softened with confusion. "No, dear. Callista always helped your father. You were in grade school," she said. My chest tightened. This was not just memory loss, this felt like erasure. I pulled out another photo, me climbing a ladder, paint can in hand. She shook her head gently. "I must have forgotten," she said. "It was so long ago." Something cracked inside me. I left before she could say more. Outside, bright sunlight struck my eyes. I pressed my palm to the window of my car and exhaled. Later, I opened my laptop and began digging. In my email archives, I found scanned receipts from hardware stores, paint cans, lumber, varnish, all purchased in my name. Documents I had pulled to boast to Dad on his 55th birthday. Evidence that I had contributed more than they ever let me claim. My fingers hovered over a new email draft to Callista. "Why did you erase me?" I typed, but then deleted it. I hated how vulnerable that looked. Instead I typed inside my notes app, "Someone rewrote my place in this family and I intend to take it back." In the margin, I wrote the word, "Chronicle." If I couldn't trust them to remember me, I would make sure the world did. Outfit changed, heart heavier, I drove to the family estate, quiet now in midday calm. I walked through hallways where family photos hung, Callista on Dad's shoulder, Mom smiling beside her, cousins clustered. I searched for me, I found only gaps and odd museums of light. In the living room, I paused before a large portrait, Callista and Dad, painted together in the early years. My smaller version had once stood to the side. Now, the canvas was cropped, or maybe retouched. The frame was new. I traced my finger over its edge. I felt something like fury and sorrow twist together. I stepped away and whispered, "You can't erase me." Then I walked out, leaving the house as I had entered, through a door no one held open for me. When I reached my car, I pulled out a small voice recorder I had stashed months ago, back when I still believed we were just drifting apart. I pressed record. I spoke clearly, calmly, "I am Emerald Vale. In 2007, I spent $12,500 to rebuild the porch that collapsed during the storm. I did this. My name must carry weight." I clicked off the recorder and took a deep breath. The air tasted cold, but it felt necessary. I would catalog this, every erased moment, every stolen credit. I would not let them pretend I never existed. That night, I stared at that same album on my lap, open to a page Callista had replaced. My finger hovered over the empty space where I should have been. And I knew, this was only the beginning. I shut the photo album with a soft snap, its worn hinge creaking like an old door. The silence that followed was sharp, almost accusing. I sat there, forehead resting against the back of the couch, eyes shut, trying to steady my breathing. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with unspoken things. Outside, the evening bled into night, shadows stretching across the floorboards like the fingers of memories I wasn't ready to face. When morning came, it wasn't gentle. The sunlight pierced through the blinds in sharp, uneven slats, carving up the room with harsh light. I woke up feeling brittle. Every movement felt mechanical, clothes, shoes, keys. I didn't make coffee. I didn't eat. There was a pressure in my chest that made it impossible. I needed answers. Not closure, not understanding, just evidence. Cold, unfeeling proof. The county recorder's office was quiet, in that municipal way. The kind of quiet that hums with bureaucracy and caffeine. I stood in line behind a man checking his watch and a woman nervously flipping through folders. The scent of old paper, plastic sleeves, and weak coffee hovered in the air. I clutched the signed request like it was a lifeline, title records, deed transfers, chain of ownership from 1990 to the present. My number was called. A young clerk with tired eyes led me to a small, windowed reading room. She returned minutes later with a thick packet, bound in a clear plastic folder. I thanked her and sat, my hands shaking as I opened it. The pages whispered as I turned them. There it was. Property title, 2142, Rosemere Avenue. Owner, Callista Sable. Transfer date, April 2019. Witnessed by Joanne Little and Henry Dent. No co-signers. No joint ownership. No Emily Sable. I stared at it, unblinking. My name, absent. My father's, replaced. My hands trembled against the laminate. My vision blurred, but I forced myself to read every line, every column, every marginal note. Callista's name was the only one that mattered. And it had been filed after Dad passed. She hadn't just inherited it. She had taken it. I leaned back in the chair, the plastic digging into my spine. My reflection in the glass window beside me looked hollow. Ashen. I sat still for a long time, letting the truth settle like cold water down my back. When I finally asked the clerk about earlier records, older filings, anything prior to that date, she gave a small, sympathetic shrug. That's what's on record, she murmured, without meeting my eyes. Are there archives? A prior version of the deed? Something from before the transfer? I pressed. She hesitated, then scribbled down a list of contacts, filing officers, legal clerks, people who might have handled older versions. I thanked her. I left the building with the packet tucked tightly under my arm, like something stolen. As I walked toward the parking garage, memories kept rising like unwelcome ghosts. I remembered repainting the porch with Dad, each stroke of the brush a shared promise. He handed me the corner brush while Callista posed for selfies, complaining about the heat. She barely stayed an hour, always vanishing before cleanup. Still, I believed we were building something together, that we were preserving something that mattered. 10 years ago, everything had begun to unravel. Dad's heart surgery had destabilized everything, his business, our family, Mom's already fragile composure. The house nearly went into default. I had just landed my first full-time teaching position, finally off the adjunct treadmill. I remember the night I made the transfer, $40,000. Every cent from my personal savings. I refinanced my small condo and quietly wired the money into the joint account Dad had opened in all 3 of our names. He didn't ask me. I just did it. I was proud. Callista never said thank you. Dad did. He took my hand, looked into my eyes, and said, "When this house stands, it'll always be because of you." That memory used to warm me. Now, it burned. Back then, I thought trust and sacrifice were enough. I never asked for paperwork, for legal documentation. Just trust. Family was supposed to mean something. Now I knew better. The drive home was a blur. The streets looked unfamiliar, warped by the heat and the ache in my chest. At every stoplight, I stared at my reflection in the windshield. I looked like someone who had woken up in someone else's life. The woman looking back at me had the same eyes, but they were clouded with disbelief, and something sharper. At home, I barely made it through the front door before collapsing to my knees. The folder slipped from my fingers, pages fanning out across the floor like discarded proof of who I was. My phone buzzed. A voicemail. It was Callista. Her voice was cold, clipped. "Stop digging, Em. You're only going to hurt yourself." That was all. No emotion. Just a warning, almost a threat. I sat on the floor, blanket around my shoulders, and played it again. Her voice sliced through the silence, tidy, practiced, uncaring. I stared at the wall for a long time. Tears pressed behind my eyes, but they didn't fall. Not yet. These weren't tears of sorrow. They were sharp, bitter. Tears of fury. But underneath that a spark. I stood, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. I created a new folder and named it Chronicle. I began to type, document everything. Build your own version of the truth. Outside, the first drops of rain tapped against the window pane, as if echoing the rhythm of something beginning. Not a breakdown. A gathering. Tonight, I would gather every receipt, every bank transfer, every email. I would trace my own fingerprints in the foundation of that house. I would build a truth that could not be erased. When I closed the laptop, my eyes drifted back to the photo album on the coffee table. Its empty pages still waited. I walked over, ran my fingers along the edge. "I will be back in those frames," I whispered. Then I turned off the lights. And listened to the storm arrive. The rain didn't last through the night. By morning, San Diego was scrubbed clean, the sky washed to a soft blue. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the water evaporate from the street. The world looked calm, ordinary, but I couldn't unsee the holes left in my life. Every erased photo, every missing credit, every silence that felt deliberate. By late afternoon, I forced myself out of the apartment. The community center downtown was hosting a charity gala for local education programs. I had helped plan one of those projects 2 years ago, a renovation at Lincoln Elementary. My name was on the original blueprints, my sweat in those walls. I hadn't wanted to attend, but something in me said I should. Maybe I still hoped to feel proud of something. Inside, folding chairs lined up before a projector screen. Tables of cupcakes and finger sandwiches filled the air with sugar and perfume. I found a seat toward the back. The lights dimmed. A video began, soft music, children laughing, images of the renovated classrooms. I smiled despite myself. I remembered sanding those old desks, painting the walls a cheerful yellow. That school had been falling apart before I stepped in to manage the budget and labor volunteers. For once, I believed my effort mattered. Then the credits rolled. The video showed Callista standing in front of the finished building, a hard hat tilted on her styled hair, smiling for the camera. The caption read, "Lead Philanthropist, Callista Sable." My breath caught. The music swelled, the crowd clapped politely. Callista's voice filled the room, confident, poised. "It was my dream," she said on screen. "To restore Lincoln Elementary and give children a brighter future." My hands went cold. My name never appeared. Not once. A woman beside me, a volunteer from the center, her hair tied in a red scarf, leaned toward me and whispered, "Didn't you design that project?" I felt my lips curve into a small, controlled smile. "I guess I forgot to remind them who I was," I said softly. She laughed awkwardly, not realizing the wound her question had torn open. When the lights came on, applause filled the hall. People surrounded Callista near the front, shaking her hand, complimenting her leadership. I stayed seated, watching her pose for pictures, radiant, owning my work. The humiliation wasn't loud, it was quiet, suffocating. I could feel my pulse in my ears, but my face stayed calm. Years of practice. I left without saying goodbye. Driving home, I turned the radio on, just for noise. The announcer mentioned the same gala, praising Callista Sable's commitment to education. I shut it off before the next sentence. At home, I dropped my purse on the table, opened my laptop, and began digging. I typed Lincoln Elementary project files into my search bar. My inbox flooded with old emails, contractors, budget approvals, purchase orders. All with my digital signature. I opened one after another, my own name right there in the timestamps. Design revisions approved, Emerald Vale. Vendor payment confirmed, Emerald Vale. Volunteer schedule updated, Emerald Vale. Proof. All of it. I scrolled further back, clicking through archived messages between Callista and the sponsors. Her replies were clipped, impersonal. At one point, she had even written, "My sister is handling the logistics for now." For now. I printed everything, not out of anger, but necessity. Paper didn't lie. I slipped each page into a black folder and labeled it with a piece of masking tape, Shadow Ledger. One by one, I pulled sticky notes from the drawer and began building a timeline across my wall. 2013, house refinance, my savings used. 2015, school renovation, credit removed. 2017, foundation gala, speech edited. 2019, estate transfer, my name missing. I stood back and looked at it. My life, reduced to a wall of thefts dressed as memories. But something inside me shifted, the helplessness turning into calculation. If they had rewritten the narrative, I would write it again. Properly. As evening settled in, I poured a glass of water, sat down at my desk, and opened a new email draft. The recipient, Lauren Bennett, an old friend from college who now worked as an attorney. Subject line, just a hypothetical about family property disputes. I typed, "Hey Lauren. If someone made changes to a shared estate after a parent's passing, without notifying other heirs, what would be the first step to confirm it legally?" Then I stopped. My cursor blinked like it was waiting for courage I hadn't decided to use yet. I deleted the message. Not out of fear, out of precision. This wasn't the moment to strike. I needed every fact, every thread tight before pulling. The clock ticked past midnight. My apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge. On the wall, the timeline glowed under the soft desk lamp. I pinned 2 photos to the corner, one of Callista smiling in a newspaper article, another of me, younger, covered in paint during the renovation. The contrast was almost cruel. Her face looked polished, mine, exhausted but real. I whispered, "She told the world she built it. I built it in silence. That ends now." It wasn't anger anymore that guided me. It was a clear, focused resolve. Before going to bed, I organized the printed papers into folders by date, labeled and stacked. I made digital copies, stored them on an external drive, one in the cloud, one hidden behind a password she'd never guess, the name of our dog from childhood, gone long before she learned how loyalty worked. I lay in bed, but sleep refused to come. My mind played the evening scene over and over, the applause, the lights, her confident laugh. I could still hear the woman beside me whispering, "Didn't you design that project?" The answer echoed in my chest, "Yes. And I will make them remember." The next morning, the sun broke through faint fog, pale gold on the buildings. I made coffee, opened my curtains, and stood for a long time watching the city come alive. The storm was over, but I could feel another one forming, not in the sky, but inside me. By noon, I had packed the black folder into my tote bag. I was done watching from afar. I knocked on her door. I wasn't asking anymore. The sound of my knuckles against her polished oak door felt louder than I expected. It wasn't just knocking, it was every year of silence echoing back at me. The black folder in my hand weighed more than paper should. It was the weight of being erased, repackaged, and told to smile about it. The door swung open after a pause. Callista stood there, still perfect. Her hair, her pressed blouse, her calm expression, the same detached poise she wore when taking credit for my life's work. For a brief second, her eyes widened when she saw me. Then her smile slid into place, practiced and polite. "Emerald," she said evenly. "I didn't expect you." "No," I replied, stepping forward. "You never do." She hesitated, hand still on the doorknob. "Is this about the gala? Because if it is, you're overreacting." "It's not about the gala." My voice came out low, controlled. "It's about my name." That made her blink. She stepped aside reluctantly, motioning me in. Her home looked like a magazine spread, cold, curated. There were framed photos of her shaking hands with city officials, charity plaques on the walls. I noticed one that said, "Presented to Callista Sable for outstanding community leadership." I'd written the project proposal that earned her that plaque. "Coffee," she offered automatically, heading toward the kitchen. "I won't be staying long," I said. My fingers tapped against the folder. "I just need to ask you something." She turned, her tone light. "Ask away." I opened the folder and pulled out a document, sliding it across her spotless marble counter. "Why is my name on this donation authorization?" I asked quietly, "but not my signature?" For the first time, she didn't have words ready. Her eyes flicked over the page, the corporate logo, the transaction date, the forged version of my name neatly printed beneath hers. Her expression froze, then reset. "I did what I had to do," she said finally, her voice calm but thinner than usual. "You were too slow. Too invisible. Someone had to make things happen." I studied her face. It was almost impressive how easily she justified it, like betrayal was a professional skill. "You forged my name, Callista." "I represented you," she corrected, her smile tightening. "You've always cared about the cause, haven't you?" "I just made sure it got done." "That's not representation," I said. "That's theft." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You really want to do this now? After everything I've done to keep this family's reputation clean?" "Clean?" I almost laughed. "You've scrubbed it spotless, by removing me from it." She crossed her arms, her tone flattening. "You're being dramatic. You never had the stomach for how real business works." I leaned forward, close enough to see the faint tremor in her jaw. "What you call business, I call erasure." For the first time, she looked uncertain. It was faint, but I saw it, the flicker of fear behind arrogance. "I'm not here to argue," I said finally, my tone steady. "I'm here to warn you." She tilted her head. "Warn me?" "Yes." I pulled another paper from the folder, a notarized statement of my contributions to the estate and school project, complete with bank transfers and witness confirmations. "If you keep using my name, my work, or my silence, I'll take everything to court." Her mouth tightened. She laughed softly, like someone humoring a child. "Court? Really? Do you even know what that costs?" "Less than what you'll lose," I said. That landed. Her jaw clenched. She turned away, busied herself with adjusting a vase on the counter, but her movements were stiffer now. "You're angry," she said without looking at me. "You'll regret letting emotion drive you." "No," I said, voice calm. "I regret letting fear stop me." Her hand froze midair. The silence stretched between us, thick and electric. I took a deep breath, placed the black folder on the counter, and stepped back. "You can keep the copy," I said. "You'll need it." Then I turned toward the door. Behind me, her voice sharpened. "You think you can scare me, Em?" I stopped but didn't turn around. "No," I said softly. "But I can expose you." Outside, the afternoon light had cooled into gold. The quiet of the gated street felt surreal after the tension inside. I walked back to my car slowly, feeling my pulse settle into something new, not panic, not rage, but control. As I buckled my seatbelt, I glanced back at her front door. Through the window, I saw her silhouette standing motionless, staring down at the folder I'd left. For once, she looked small. Driving home, the weight in my chest lifted slightly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt restored. That night, I sat at my desk with the same precision as before, updating my timeline. Red pins now dotted the board in sharp, deliberate rows. I drew one connecting line and labeled it simply, Confrontation, Friday, 4:45 p.m. Next, I opened my laptop and navigated to my email. The draft to Lauren, the lawyer, was still sitting there, unsent. I clicked it open, read the words again, then added one line at the top. It's no longer hypothetical. My cursor hovered over the send button for a long moment. Then I clicked it. The reply came faster than I expected. A ping echoed through the quiet. Let's talk. I've seen Callista in court before. She's messy. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. For the first time in months, I wasn't replaying old memories, I was planning the future. I looked around the apartment. The wall of documents, photos, and notes looked less like a monument to pain now, and more like a battle map. Dad's words drifted through my mind again, as clear as if he were standing beside me. The moment you know who you are, nothing can erase you. I whispered back into the dim room, I know now. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, lining the quiet neighborhood like watchful eyes. I closed the folder, set it beside me, and poured a cup of tea. My hands were steady. It was strange, how strength didn't always feel like thunder. Sometimes it felt like stillness after a long storm. Tomorrow, I'd meet with the lawyer. Tomorrow, the next chapter of this war would begin. But tonight, I allowed myself one moment of peace. The morning sun spilled through the blinds like a quiet confrontation. It wasn't gentle. It cut across the floor and landed on the file I'd kept unopened for days, the shadow ledger. My fingers hovered over it, the ceramic mug in my hand growing cold. Today wasn't just another day of staring at evidence. Today, it became ammunition. I had replayed the decision 1,000 times in my head. But there was a moment when overthinking turned into paralysis, and I had lived there long enough. Now, it was time to move. By late afternoon, I had set up my living room like a war room. Laptop open, folders arranged, highlighter pens capped and ready. My nerves twitched beneath calm movements. I pulled up Mira Castor's number, my thumb lingering for a second longer than necessary before pressing call. She answered on the second ring. Emerald, she said. I was just reviewing your files. No surprise. No small talk. Her tone was crisp, clinical. I'm ready, I said. The words left me steadier than I expected. Good. Meet me online in 15. We'll go through everything. Be thorough. 15 minutes later, her face appeared on my screen, sleek black blazer, hair pinned back, eyes sharp. Mira didn't waste energy on reassurances or doubts. She simply said, show me. And I did. I shared my screen, opened folder by folder. The email threads that traced Callista's manipulation, timestamped versions of proposals she stole and renamed. The scanned invoices, contractor quotes under my name, the forged signature authorizing donations I never approved. One document at a time, like peeling back a scab. Her eyes didn't flinch. But her jaw tightened with each scroll. Forged signature misuse of identity. This is solid, she finally said. You've done more groundwork than most clients who show up in court unprepared. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. We'll start with a cease and desist, she continued, fingers already typing. If she ignores it, we move forward with civil action. With this much material? Damages are on the table. A strange sensation swelled in my chest, equal parts fear and power. This wasn't just talk anymore. It was real. It was happening. By sundown, the letter was drafted. Mira sent me a preview before mailing the official copy to Callista's nonprofit headquarters. I stood by the mailbox, the sky gray and low above me. The wind smelled like approaching rain. I slid the envelope through the metal slot, not just mail, but a message. Not just paper, but proof that I wouldn't be quiet anymore. Somewhere across the city, Callista sat basking in the glow of her own fiction, brunch in a glass-walled room, surrounded by donors, charm turned up like a spotlight. I didn't need to be there. I saw it through the photos they posted, the live stream one of her interns shared. The way she smiled for the camera, fingers poised just so over her champagne glass. And then, the moment came. A server approached her table. An envelope rested on the tray. She tilted her head, curious. Then she took it. The return address? Mine. Her manicured fingers hesitated for just a second. A tremor. Then she opened it. I couldn't see her expression. But I imagined it, the shift, subtle at first, then unmistakable. The way the carefully applied mask cracked just at the corners. I imagined her throat tightening, the way mine had when I first discovered the betrayal. Inside the envelope, a formal cease and desist. Stop using my name. Stop using my work. Stop using my likeness, my legacy, my narrative. And compensate. Retroactively. A hush fell over the brunch table, caught on camera even in silence. Her team looked around. Confused murmurs. One assistant leaned in and whispered, unaware the microphone had caught it. They're threatening litigation and they have receipts. Callista smiled again, but this time, it didn't reach her eyes. Her knuckles turned pale as she clutched the letter. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed. An email alert. A reply from the nonprofit board. Subject, submitted evidence, official acknowledgement. They were opening a formal review. For a moment, I just sat there, stunned. Vindication isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a ping in your inbox that tells you someone else finally sees what you've endured. Then my phone buzzed again. A text from Callista. You think this scares me? I stared at it. The words were pure bravado. But they reeked of something else, too, fear, cornered pride, and a desperate cling to control. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked to my wall board. On it were names, dates, lines connecting betrayals like a crime scene. I picked up a red marker. I found her name, Callista, written in bold black ink. I drew a hard, irreversible line through it. No more negotiations. No more silence. Later that night, Myra's message appeared in my inbox. Next step, we file. I exhaled. The air in the room felt different now, heavier, yes, but also charged with resolve. The weight on my shoulders didn't vanish, but it finally shifted. I wasn't carrying shame anymore. I was carrying proof. The war had begun. Not of fists or shouts, but of facts, justice, and the unwavering determination to reclaim what was mine. And this time, I wouldn't back down. The sky hung low, a dull sheet of gray pressing down on the city as I stepped out of my apartment. The air smelled faintly of cold pavement and rain yet to fall. I adjusted the strap of my bag across my shoulder, the weight of the folder inside tugging at my spine like a lead anchor. It was more than paper. It was history, receipts, secrets, truth. In the elevator, a neighbor gave me a quiet nod. I nodded back, but neither of us said anything. Some silences aren't awkward, they're just heavy. When the doors opened, I walked out briskly, as if movement alone could stop my nerves from spiraling. Driving downtown, I didn't turn on the radio. I needed the quiet. The engine's hum, the rhythm of red lights, the city's silent judgment, everything outside felt quieter than what was building inside me. I wasn't going to attend the board meeting. That was never the plan. But I had sent Mira ahead with everything. Every email, forged endorsement, grant misappropriation, every project Callista took credit for, all collected, documented, organized. Today, they would hear my voice, through the evidence, through Myra's steadiness. Today, the story would not be hers alone. The nonprofit's building loomed ahead. Glass and steel, spotless and tall, as if pretending integrity could be polished into walls. I parked across the street and sat in the car for a few moments, watching reflections shift in the glass. My phone buzzed. A message from Mira. Mira, I'm in. Just breathe. I closed my eyes and exhaled. Her words cut through the static. I grabbed my bag and headed in. The lobby felt colder than I remembered. Marble floors, quiet halls. At the end of the corridor, the boardroom door stood ajar. I could hear faint voices inside. I walked slowly, deliberately, each footstep echoing in the quiet. As I stepped inside, heads turned. The room was full, board members, legal counsel, sponsors. Callista sat at the head of the table, radiant in her typical performance of composure, but I could see it, her hands gripped the armrest just a little too tightly. Mira stood at the opposite end, her back straight, her expression calm but fiery. A slide projector was mid-transition behind her, casting white blue light against the wall. No one greeted me. No one needed to. My presence alone shifted the air. Mira spoke clearly, her voice steady. Slide after slide appeared, email headers, financial records, project proposals. I saw the confusion bloom, then harden into anger across the board members' faces. She used my credentials to apply for the Johnson grant, Mira said, projecting an email showing the timestamp. But the attached files were written by Emerald. Note the metadata. The room rustled. Callista stayed composed, but her smile twitched. A man in a gray suit leaned forward. Are you saying she forged her sister's identity? For funding? No one answered. The documents did. Callista finally broke the silence. My sister is emotionally unstable. She's been struggling for years. She's retaliating. This is personal. The projection clicked to another slide, photos of my project site, development logs, timestamps, and names erased and replaced. A woman from the sponsorship board raised an eyebrow. Retaliating against theft? The air chilled. A board member slammed his palm against the table. This isn't a branding issue. This is fraud. Deception at the organizational level. Callista opened her mouth again, but her voice cracked. She turned to me, not Mira. Why are you doing this? She asked. For a moment, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The files already had. Mira continued presenting. I remained by the door, silent, unwavering. Watching Callista's empire crack, not with an explosion, but with the slow crumble of denial meeting evidence. Her voice didn't rise again. Her shoulders sank a little more with every slide. Every truth laid bare. Back home, I unlocked my door and leaned against it for a breath. My bones ached, not from exhaustion, but from release. Then I saw it. A small package, carefully placed on my doormat. I opened it slowly. Inside was a framed photo, Dad and me, on a sunlit afternoon years ago. I remembered that day. My shirt was splattered with paint, and he had that look, soft and proud. Behind the frame was a typed note. You were never invisible to him. My throat tightened. This was the photo. The one Callista had removed from our family wall when she redecorated the hallway. Said it didn't fit the palette. I hung it above my whiteboard, right in the center. My command center. My war room. Now, it was a monument. The shadow ledger glowed softly beneath it, pages pinned and strings crisscrossed with dates, names, grants, connections. I stared at it all, then whispered to no one. The things they erase I rebuild. I sat at my desk. Opened my laptop. Logged into the blog I'd created weeks ago, forgotten in the whirlwind. It wasn't flashy. Just a simple archive of truth. I uploaded the documents, excerpts, financials, email chains, photos. Then I wrote one post, clear, factual, and free of theatrics. Then I shared the link. The responses came within minutes. I always wondered what happened to the Emerald Initiative. Now it makes sense. She took all the credit, didn't she? Thank you for speaking up. No fireworks. Just slow ripples of truth. And through it all, Callista stayed silent. But her silence was different now. Not elegant. Not commanding. It was damning. My phone buzzed. Mira again. Mira, they want a settlement meeting. Tomorrow. In person. I closed my laptop and looked around my apartment. It wasn't just a home anymore. It was a rebuilt self. A starting line. Tomorrow, I wouldn't go in with shaky hands. I wouldn't ask for fairness. I would walk into that room, not to beg, not to negotiate, but to stand. The morning of the meeting came cloaked in gray. There was a strange kind of stillness outside, the kind that settles before something irreversible happens. I woke before the sun, wrapped my fingers around a warm cup of tea, and sat by the window in silence. The city below stirred slowly, unaware of the reckoning that was about to unfold. My hands were steady. My heart, quiet. I had already lived through the chaos, today was simply the unveiling. By 9 a.m., I stood inside a sleek glass building downtown, a San Diego law office that looked out over the glinting water of the bay. Mira was already there, waiting with a calm I envied. The receptionist led us to a large conference room with polished wood walls and a table that gleamed like it had secrets of its own. Callista was already seated with her lawyers, poised and polished as always. A pearl necklace sat like armor around her throat, and her navy blazer was wrinkle-free, precise. But there was something fraying beneath her polish, the tightness in her jaw, the way her eyes scanned the room too quickly. Mira opened her case and began distributing folders across the table with practiced ease. "Let's begin," she said. The conversation started with the usual posturing. Terms like internal miscommunication, misaligned intent, and shared assets floated across the table like soft bullets. Callista spoke sparingly, letting her lawyers do the work. I listened in silence, and this time, it wasn't silence out of fear. It was strategy. Let them underestimate me, again. Then Mira reached into her case and pulled out a small silver recorder. She placed it gently on the table. "This," she said, her voice even, "is a private statement from Mr. Adrian Klein. Submitted voluntarily." Callista's hand froze. Her mouth tensed. Mira pressed play. Adrian's voice came through, slightly crackled, but unmistakably clear. "I should have come forward sooner. What she did to Emerald wasn't just business. It was personal. She manipulated trust. She used her position, our family ties, as leverage. Every time I questioned it, she'd say, 'No one listens to the quiet one anyway.' I regret staying silent." The room went completely still. Even the air conditioner seemed to hush. Callista's face went pale. One of the board members, joining by video, leaned forward and murmured, "That's not a policy issue. That's fraud." Mira turned toward Callista. "This statement wasn't included in your disclosure documents, was it?" Her attorney leaned in, whispering frantically, but it was too late. The tide had turned. For the first time, Callista didn't speak. The smirk was gone. The performance collapsed. By the next morning, the family nonprofits board had made its decision public. Callista Sable was officially removed from the executive committee, pending a full investigation into financial misconduct and abuse of position. Her profile disappeared from the organization's website before noon. Someone sent me a photo, her nameplate being removed from the office door. A secretary was packing up framed awards while whispering to another, she thought she was untouchable. An hour later, I received an email from the board, inviting me back in an advisory capacity. I didn't reply. I didn't need to go back. That chapter had closed, not with vengeance, but with clarity. That afternoon, I drove to the old family estate. The house that had once been the stage for so many fights and betrayals. The driveway was cracked. The rosebushes lining the path were overgrown and browning at the edges. Paint peeled near the shutters, and a film of dust covered the porch railing. I parked by the front gate, got out, and just stood there. Breathing. Remembering. Once, I'd begged to be welcomed here. I'd fought for a place in a family that only saw me as a resource. Now, standing before it again, I felt nothing pulling me in. No pain. No anger. Just release. From my bag, I pulled out the manila envelope, the final settlement documents. Unopened. Unsigned. I didn't need what was inside anymore. I had already taken back something far more important, my name, my story, my peace. As I turned to leave, something in the upstairs window caught my eye. A shadow. Callista stood there, motionless behind the glass. Our eyes locked for a second, neither of us blinking. She looked thinner. Hollow. Her hand rested against the window, but she didn't raise it. She didn't try to speak. She didn't need to. That silence, the one she used to weaponize against me, now hung between us like a final, heavy truth. Back home, I poured myself another cup of tea and sat again by the window. The same spot I had sat that morning. The sky had cleared, and sunlight streaked gently through the clouds, painting gold across the rooftops. Above my desk hung an old photo, Dad and me, both laughing, our hands stained in green paint from a backyard project I barely remembered the details of. But I remembered his words, clear as ever. "The moment you know who you are, nothing can erase you." He was right. Justice hadn't needed applause. It hadn't come with revenge or dramatic scenes. It had arrived quietly, in truth spoken aloud, in silence no longer feared, in power reclaimed piece by piece. I picked up a pen and wrote on the whiteboard below the photo. "I am remembered." Then I turned off the lights. And let the night come, not as an ending, but as peace. When dawn arrived, it didn't blaze, it seeped. The morning light tiptoed across the hallway like a child unsure if it was welcome, brushing its fingers along the walls of a house that remembered silence too well. Outside, the world went on, dogs barked, mail trucks rolled by, leaves rustled in the trees. But inside me, a different storm had settled. One that had already broken, wept, and rebuilt itself in quiet defiance. I held the photo box in my arms, heavy not with weight, but with memory, as I climbed the narrow stairs to my mother's house. It was still the same house from childhood, though the wallpaper had faded and the creaks in the floorboards had grown bolder. The front door was unlocked. It had always been, ever since Dad passed, as if locking it would somehow seal him away for good. I stepped inside. The living room smelled of old lavender sachets and the dry scent of aged wood. Time lingered here, refusing to move forward. Mom sat in her usual armchair by the window, her lap draped in a quilt whose edges were fraying like the years themselves. She didn't acknowledge me at first, just sat there, staring into the autumn morning. I didn't speak right away. I cleared my throat gently. She turned. Her eyes found mine slowly, like they had to travel through fog to reach me. They glistened, not just from tears, but something older, deeper. Memory, perhaps. Mom, I said softly, setting the box on the ottoman. I found this. She looked down at it, hesitant. Then back at me. Her body moved slowly as she pushed the quilt aside and rose, her knees trembling beneath her nightgown. Still, she stood. Still, she faced me. She reached out, touching the box like it might vanish. Then, with trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside were fragments of what once was, my childhood crayon drawings, an 8th grade speech recorded on an old cassette, a yellowing honor roll certificate, birthday cards, even a single dried flower pressed between paper. She found the note near the top. My name was scrawled across the front in Dad's unmistakable handwriting. Her lips parted. "How did I forget you?" she whispered. We sat together for a while, no words, just breath and weight and time. I didn't reach to hold her, though the ache in my chest told me to. Instead, I let her sit with it. Let her feel what I had carried for years. Eventually, she broke the silence. "I don't remember so many things. Sometimes it's like my mind rearranged the furniture of my life and forgot where it put you." I took a breath. "You always remember Dad, don't you?" She nodded slowly, eyes drifting toward the window. I pulled out the cassette tape, slid it into an old recorder I'd kept all these years. The motor clicked, then hummed. His voice, my father's voice, emerged from the static like a ghost returning home. "If anything happens to me, don't let them erase you. You're the best of us, Emerald. I see you." The words were fractured, interrupted by time and tape hiss, but clear enough. I closed my eyes as his voice washed over me, warm and broken in all the right places. I wept, not from grief, but recognition. After all these years, someone had seen me. Truly seen me. When I opened my eyes, Mom was watching. She didn't speak. But her face said it all, regret, sorrow, maybe even relief. Later that afternoon, I found a letter waiting for me on the kitchen counter. It was from Callista. The handwriting was sharp, her usual deliberate style. I opened it slowly, unsure what I expected, an apology, a confession, or another excuse. "You were better. I just couldn't stand it." That was all. No greeting. No signature. Just raw resentment inked onto paper. I folded the letter and placed it in the photo box. I didn't need to read it again. I wouldn't burn it either. Some truths deserve a place, not to be honored, but to be remembered. Mom reached for my hand then. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. She didn't say anything. Just held on. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like something, not everything, but something had healed. I told her I wasn't going back to the nonprofit. Not now. Maybe not ever. That chapter had closed. Instead, I planned to start a grant in Dad's name, one for women whose stories had been edited out of history, whose names had been erased in favor of others. She nodded, silently approving. As I packed the box, she called out softly from the doorway. "Emerald." I turned. "You were never erased," she said. My throat tightened. I gave a quiet nod. It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it didn't need to be. It was truth, plain and heavy. When I walked out of that house for the last time, I didn't carry hope for what it could be. I carried memory. Not to reclaim the past, but to release it. At the threshold, I whispered, "Some houses can't be rebuilt. But you can still build something better." Outside, across the street, I saw her, Callista, watching from the upstairs window of her townhouse. Her face unreadable. A silent witness to my leaving. I didn't wave. Didn't pause. The air felt lighter as I stepped into it. The sky stretched open, and the road ahead didn't just wait, it welcomed. I got in my car, turned the engine, and drove forward. And this time, I didn't look back. Sometimes, the deepest scars come not from strangers, but from those who were supposed to love us the most. But healing doesn't always mean returning, it can mean walking away, standing tall, and rebuilding on your own terms. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. If this story moved you, don't forget